Out of that. Try this again. So, oh, it's ready. Okay. Oh, we got off to a late start. We were selling all the world's problems. So maybe we'll let the world in on it what the solution is, but if not, uh, you can talk to one of us afterwards. Um, so we're at Second Chronicles 24. Joash. One of the spellings is Jehoash, but Joash is um, remember he's a young fella, and his person that raised him, the high priest, uh, well, he protected him, and then they defeated the queen, Athaliah, and so Jehoiada, the high priest. So, chapter 24 begins really the story of Joash. Um, so, which would you rather hear? I'm just going to ask a question here. Had you rather hear a story about a guy that started off rough, did a lot of bad things, but changed his tune, and his last many years he was devout and sound? Or had you rather hear about a guy that lived his young life really well, was righteous and everything, but then at some point everything changed and he was not the same person? So, which would you rather hear about? Yes, I think that's human nature. I think it's also redemption. We like that. Yet there's something always saddening about someone that starts off great and then throws it away because uh, they leave the principles that got them where they were. Uh, and there's some kings like that. For example, Joash is going to be the king that's going to start off great but throws it all away. Later on, there's a king that uh, well, for the most part, people will talk about him being evil, but he does change at the end. And yet, what's interesting is most time, if you read something, commentary about him or whatever, they'll talk about how he was evil, and it is true he was evil in his beginning, but he changed before he died. Manasseh, and Manasseh is the one that started off really bad and yet changes at some point. So, uh, sometimes we don't applaud the ones that do change. I think in person we do. I think we realize a person that uh, did a lot of bad things. However, those bad things sometimes have consequences. So, no matter how well you do, you may have some consequences from your actions prior. For example, if you were a horrible father and husband, and during the process, your kids don't want to have anything to do with you, and your wife divorces you, and even if you change in later years, you may not ever get a relationship with your kids back, and so there can be some serious consequences the farther you go uh, before you change. So it's always better just to stay faithful from the beginning to the end, uh, and you don't have those issues. But anyway, um, I like the way Paul started out and ended. Yeah, but uh, the thing about Paul's a little different. He's kind of uh, in a different category. Paul always lived with a good conscience, so he always felt like he was doing what God would want him to do. Now he was way wrong, but it'd be more like, say, someone that grew up in a denomination, for example, and thought they were right, and then at some point, maybe towards middle of their life, they realized that they were wrong. Well, odds are they're not going to be able to convert their whole family. They're not going to convert all their friends, and so there's going to be a little disconnect there. So Paul probably had that as well. I don't know how much uh, he probably was fairly close to his family when he was Saul, but when he became Paul, he probably had little to do with most of his family. So, so you're right. I do like Paul's story. His life process he lived, but yet Paul was one that always lived with a good conscience. So he always, in his mind, did what he thought was right for God. Some of these, though, they go even beyond that. They don't care a thing about God, and then they'll turn out right. They'll change at some point. So, uh, all those are good stories, good accounts. Uh, but it's also good to read about someone like a David, not David. Well, David had his ups and downs, but say a Daniel or a Joseph that their arc was pretty much always trying to do what God wanted. Um, and so but everybody has their own life, their own story in their own life. Not everybody makes the right choices to begin with, and it kind of can make us. I know a guy that wasn't too far from here in Salisaw that he didn't become a Christian until he was around 40, I guess. And but when he became a Christian, he already knew a lot because he'd studied for decades with his wife and others. And I mean, he was ready to go. He was on fire. He I don't know how many he brought to Christ, studying with them, and it was because of his background that he could really talk to a lot of people that weren't Christians. So it prepared him, and I think Paul's the same way. Paul was prepared in a way that his life became a preparation for what kind of leader he became. Okay, so Joash. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. So now, so think about that. So if he was 7 when he started, and he reigned for 40 years, how old was he when he died? That's basic math. Let's see. 40 plus 7 is. That at the end of the 40 years? Yeah, that's when you stop reigning. Yeah. So how old was he? 47. Now, everyone in this room is older than 47. Uh, there's Mr. Reed. So he doesn't die very old. And some of that's going to be by the actions he'll do in his life. 40 years to reign is a long time. However, I think we talked about that last week. Likely when he was 7, he was uh, all probably consulted on things and told and notified, but most likely Jehoiada was the one that made all the informed decisions until he became of age, whatever that was decided then. So probably the first 10, 11, 12 years, he was not probably the one actually calling the shots. It probably was Jehoiada. But anyway, for 40 years, his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Don't know much about her. In fact, don't know nothing about her other than she's from Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. A little bit of foreshadowing there. So he did right in what was eyes of the Lord as long as Jehoiada was alive. Now, that's not the way it talks about it. But, a lot of people will say they did right in the eyes of the Lord and it just stops there. But that's an interesting little subtext there that all the days of Jehoiada, the priest, he did right. Jehoiada got for him 2 wives. Not sure why he thought he needed 2 wives. I think that's probably a bad thing. Usually doesn't work out well. And he had sons and daughters. After this, Joash decided to restore the house of the Lord. Okay, so it was likely in disrepair. So Joash decides to restore the house of the Lord. Now, uh, I think in the King's account, it leans more on that Jehoiada had more to do with this than Joash, but they probably had an equal amount and so they both agreed to it. I'm sure Jehoiada was telling Joash about the uh, how poor shape the temple was and all that. So in verse 5, it says, "And he gathered the priests and the Levites and said to them, Go out to the cities of Judah and gather from all Israel money to repair the house of your God for from year to year, and see that you act quickly." But the Levites did not act quickly. So the king summoned Jehoiada, the chief, and said to him, "Why have you not required the Levites to bring from Judah and Jerusalem the tax levied by Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the congregation of Israel for the tent of testimony? For the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman, queen, yeah, had broken into the house of God and had also used all the dedicated." Let me scroll down in this thing. All the dedicated things of the house of the Lord for the Baal. So she had taken the money that was supposed to be for the temple and she had used it for the idol worshippers. So the king commanded, they made a chest and set it outside the gate of the house of the Lord. And provocation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem to bring in for the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of God, had laid on the wilderness. All the princes and all the people rejoiced and brought their tax and dropped in the chest until they had finished. Uh, so anyway, so this is a collection, and it was apparently started by Moses to, to furnish things and to pay for things. And so the Levites didn't go out. So what did Joash say? He basically had this big box that you would drop your money in, and that way when you went in. A little bit of wisdom in this for a young king. We don't know exactly how old he was here because there was some time that passed, but uh, so why would it be good for people to put money in there as they went in? How many people would be going in? Yeah, they'd all be going in. So basically, it was a way to. I'm sure there were signs up, may even somebody watching it, and you know, okay, maybe even somebody like kind of at the gate, like put your money in before you come in or whatever. And so it was a wise way to collect the money to repair the temple. And so everybody, it seemed to be a good idea. And that way, not one person pays too much. Everybody, pays a little bit as they come. And whenever the chest was brought to the king's officers by the Levites, when they saw there was much money in it, the king's secretary and the officer of the chief priest would come and empty the chest and take it and return it to its place. Thus they did day after day and collected money in abundance. And the king and Jehoiada gave it to those who had charge of the work of the house of the Lord. They hired masons and carpenters to restore the house of the Lord, also workers in iron and bronze to repair the house of the Lord. So apparently it needed a lot of work at this time. It had been left in disrepair. This is not going to be the only time that the temple is going to be left in disrepair, but it was here. So those who were engaged in the work labored and in the repairing went forward in their hands, and they restored the house of God to its proper condition and strengthened it. And when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada, and with it were made utensils for the house of the Lord, both for the service and for burnt offerings, and dishes for incense and vessels of gold and silver. And they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord regularly all the days of Jehoiada. It's again, high priest. But Jehoiada grew old and full of days and died, and he was 130 years old at his death. Now, that was a pretty good old age for that time. It would be like someone living about that long now. That's a good old age. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings. So even though he wasn't a king, he was a priest, he was buried among the kings because of the significance he had. He rescued the line of David, you might say, uh, because he had done good in Israel and toward God in his house. After the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and the king listened to them. And they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified against them, but they would not pay attention. So, what do you think, as long as Jehoiada was alive, Joash did what was right? And what do you think the change after Jehoiada died? He made major decisions. Made some major decisions, I'm sure, but as Joash got older, I'm sure Joash made the kingly type decisions, yeah. Have you ever seen a situation where, um, you know, we don't have this a lot, but we still have some of those. A true patriarch of a family that everyone respected, and they'd always they didn't ever want to disappoint that individual. They would really want to please that individual and do what that individual uh, believed in. And then when that individual dies, have you ever seen a situation where that family kind of falls apart? They kind of go each their own way and do different things. Some of them still stay true, some of them don't. Like I say, they all over the thing. But when that patriarch was there, they kind of always they weren't willing to do anything that would make that person think less of them, if nothing else. Don't know what was in their heart, but they really wanted to please that person. That seems to be the case here. So I don't know how uh, deep Joash's faith actually was, but Jehoiada was like his father. He respected him. He had saved his life. He wouldn't have been king without him. And regardless, he was going to do what Jehoiada wanted because he would never do anything that displeased Jehoiada. Okay? So, we have situations like that today, is my point. So, I don't know. Joash may never have been really all that deep in his faith. He may have been at times, then grew away from it. But for whatever reason, when that mentor he had that he thought so highly of, when he dies, he kind of does whatever he feels like, whatever he wants. And so that's kind of what has happened. Now, so now we get into Joash's treachery. So it's more than him just allowing people that are high up to worship the idols. It says, Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest, and he stood above the temple and said to them, Thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. Okay, so let's put it into perspective here. Um, so what does that mean that the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah? Now, in essence, the last paragraph, or the last, in verse 19, what did it say that God sent? Well, he sent the Spirit, but in verse 19, what does it say he sent? Prophets. Now, prophets can just be people that, kind of like a preacher today. But most of the time we think of prophets, we think of what? Someone that brings a message from God, and it can be a direct message in the Old Testament. And so who is this prophet that is actually sent? We actually learn his name. His name's Zechariah. Well, who was Zechariah? Who was he the son of? Jehoiada the priest. So he was the actual biological son of Jehoiada. Well, what kind of relationship did I say that Joash had with Jehoiada? Like a son. So what would that make Jehoiada Zachariah and Joash. What would they have been raised like? Brothers. Well, we see Zechariah here. He should be celebrated as a man that stood up for what's right. It doesn't work well for Zechariah, but I think it works better for him than than for Joash, because God is the one that has the ultimate say. Uh, but they conspired against him, and by command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Well, whoever this they of the conspiracy is, it actually includes Joash, because he's the one that commanded the death. Thus, Joash the king did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him, but killed his son. And when he was dying, he said, "May the Lord see and avenge." So Zechariah, as he is dying, he says, "May the Lord see and avenge." We know that the Lord sees. In verse 23, at the end of the year, the army of the Syrians came up against Joash. They came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the princes of the people from among the people and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. By the way, do you know what the capital of Syria is even today? It is. It's still Damascus. Damascus is one of the oldest cities in the world that has still retained. So a lot of cities, there's a lot of biblical cities that are no longer as prominent. In fact, even Jerusalem has a historical prominence, but Tel Aviv is by far the largest city in Israel now. But Damascus is the capital of Syria, still rather important. Uh, Though the army of the Syrians had come with few men, the Lord delivered into their hand a very great army, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Thus they executed judgment on Joash. When they had departed from him, leaving him severely wounded, his servants conspired against him because of the blood uh, of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and killed him on his bed. So he died. They buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. Those who conspired against him were Zabad, the son of Shimeath, the Ammonite, and Jehozabad, the son of Shimrith, the Moabite. Accounts of his sons and of many oracles against him. So there were other prophecies, and of the rebuilding of the house of God are written in the story of the book of the Kings, and Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place. So Jehoiada had done so much for the kingdom. He preserved the line of David by protecting Joash. And where did Jehoiada get buried? Entombed with the kings. Even though he wasn't king, that's how highly he was thought of. Who winds up, he's wounded in battle, but who winds up actually killing Joash? Well, some of his servants. But why did they kill him? Why did they give the final blow to Joash? What was on their minds and made them decide to kill the king? What had the king done? Killed the son, killed Zechariah. Because he'd killed Zechariah, Zechariah didn't deserve to be killed. And so, where is Joash buried? He's buried in Jerusalem, but not with the kings. So, isn't that, you know, God does see, and God sometimes writes things even in lifetimes. And so, anyway, so Amaziah, we'll start talking about him next week. Like I say, it's sad because the house of the Lord was in disrepair. He fixed it, and as long as Jehoiada was alive, he did what was right. But you know, we need to understand that God is always watching. So God sees everything. he no longer felt compelled to do what was right because Jehoiada wasn't alive, but what Jehoiada was doing was because of his faith in God. And so God saw all that he did. And Zechariah, like I say, was a great prophet that not much about him, but I guarantee it, he's going to wind up in heaven. He'll be someone that'd be interesting to see because he did this. And he kind of much like, another Zechariah we hear about in the New Testament that gives birth to John the Baptizer. And John the Baptizer has a similar uh, trajectory like this Zechariah, in that John the Baptizer told a king what the king ultimately and his new shacked up uh, brother's wife uh, didn't like, and so he was killed as well. So anyway, so remember the name of Zechariah, remember the sadness of Joash, and remember apparently, you know, Jehoiad, Jehoiada was a great man. I mean, uh, I'm not sure Joash's heart was in some of the things he did, but he was a strong enough man that people followed and did what was right. And so, anyway, any thoughts or comments? Or I think our time is about up. It is. Look there, 2 minutes. We're doing good. Any words of wisdom? Tater, you got to have some words of wisdom.
Mm,
You don't. Well, then if you have nothing to say, I think that's probably it for today. We'll talk about Amaziah next week. We really won't get another good king, though, until you get to Hezekiah. So we'll see.
they didn't get over David.
Can't get over David yourself.
Women.
All them women. Well, no wonder he wanted. Solomon's the one that had all the women, though. Uh, David had too many, but Solomon had so many that they drug him down.
Didn't get along with one we got.
Well, he had the idea that you could just please all of them, and that's all it would take.
I can't believe anybody got more.
Well, I want to say there's nothing wise in having more than one. So, well, I'm going to start.